Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They got it right. And this is Tom Navulis, your host. Welcome back on this wonderful day of a heat wave. A heat wave is rolling in on this Saturday, and I'm sure that everyone across this from the south down there in Texas, all the way up here into Ohio and across to various sundered places in the great land here of these United States. It's been cold, it's been snowy, and yeah, heat wave. Yeah, that's what's on. Well, today's going to be an interesting program. I have a number, well, not a number of things to cover. I want to focus back. I'm not doing anything with the Lesser Magistrate today because I did not give the presentation this past week, and I don't want anybody to have any advanced idea of what I'm going to be talking about next week when I get the opportunity to do that program here at the Lake County Liberty Coalition. So that will be fun. But we are going to talk in general because it's kind of a flow back from what I spoke of in relationship to with Governor DeWine. And also what I did not do this week because I really didn't think anybody much was interested or cared, or maybe people are just lazy and not wanting to know the evils that have been foisted upon us in the CARES Act. Now, I have taken, and last week, I would like to refer you back to that, and that you take and go look at all the money in your state. The research is there. Go back to last week's program. I put up how you can get to that information for the state of Ohio if you're in Ohio, but any state can find that same information or similar, especially at Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia will have how you can look for your state in relationship to that CARES Act and see that the federal government has taken in, they got the chokehold on every governor. They have the chokehold on the legislature. Let's see, chokeholds like this, not like that. Chokehold, yeah, like that. And for those on the radio, I'm doing the chokehold to myself, putting my arm around my neck. So you get the visual. Hopefully I described it correctly. But that's what's going on. And probably with that graphic is pretty true. The governors, I know Governor DeWine is putting a chokehold on himself and every citizen then in the state of Ohio based on the fact that, yep, the way that the CARES Act and the other legislation that is tied into it came in from the federal government. I mean, you're not even going to be able to get your food stamps covered in your state because of the way that it's tied in. Your unemployment is tied in. So many different things are so tied in that it's not just the rope around the waist. It is literally a chokehold to choke the life out of every state, out of every citizen, and turn the country over and into something else. But most people don't care about the details of that, and I'm not going to waste my time unless somebody contacts me and says, hey, Tom, we really want the research, because I already got like 7 hours into that, and it's like, it's a tangled mess. I'm telling you, it is a tangled mess. But what it does lead to is that idea of the lesser magistrate. Something that came out of the lesser magistrate that is critical that I do want to talk about, and if you saw the promo, you see that I am referring to what we call, what is that? Vocation versus indoctrination. Well, what do you mean, vocation? So I kind of want to take and bring that into reference a little bit with this week as we found out that Rush Limbaugh passed. We knew that he was taking and really pushing it hard, and that the treatments weren't working. Stage 4 is that critical time, and God blessed us and him to meet his 70th birthday, and then to take and be able to, give us a lot more information all the way into that first portions of January, and that touch point there with all that great information. There's everybody else that's out there talking about and giving all the accolades duly deserved and so on. But I want to kind of focus on one thing that he said from the very beginning that is in relationship to today's program. And that is his statement that he has talent on loan from God. And, I know that raises the hair on a lot of people's necks and, all of those types of things. And often he would even say that, oh, well, that was in lightness. And the reason he would say that. But actually, in all fact, in all reality, as we go through today's program, it was not just talent on loan from God, it was taking and understanding the gift of God in his vocation that he was able to exercise in a fulfilling manner. And as he matured in life, although he even said on his program, he doesn't make the religious statement out of it. He did not bring it in that, especially in this later part of his life, that he was doing everything he was doing for, and I will say it in a paraphrased manner, for the glory of God. For the glory of God. So this is what we're going to touch on, because what Rush learned, although he was being flippant in his younger years with saying that about talent on loan from God, you see, God doesn't loan talent like that. And I have to admit that I was not clear on this for many years. Otherwise, I probably would have done some things different in raising, in how Kathy and I raised our kids, especially how I would have had that input and direction into their lives, because I said that this is about vocation versus indoctrination, because I was indoctrinated, and we all were in so many different ways. We were indoctrinated into that whole idea that it's the American dream is to get out there and get a good education and get a good job and have your family and make sure that you're the provider, and to the extent then that, what does that mean in relationship that you're doing what you're doing for the glory of God? Well, in most cases, you don't get that. And in particular, when having been raised Catholic, and historically, as is in the notes for the program, and you can go look at those links, historically, the Roman Catholic Church never looked at vocation from that perspective. They, no different than uh, a lot of modern evangelicals, took and look at have taken and looked at vocation as something that was in the priesthood, in referencing to Roman Catholics, and that was that formatting, and we're going to get into that. In the evangelical world, when I took and committed and understood what it meant to receive in fullness that sacrificial act of Christ for my sins and acknowledged that in a way that I never understood or did before, the evangelical churches across several different denominations that Kathy and I have participated in over the years, there too, it was all about missions, missionaries. They were the ones held in the high esteem, were the missionaries and those that did service in the church, and the pastors and the teachers that were there in the church. That is all false doctrine, okay? And that's what we're going to get into in these next couple segments, because our talent is not, and the talents that our children are given are not on loan from God. They're designed by God for each and every one of us. So when we were looking, and when we look at the lesser magistrate, what's going on in that is that we'll see, and we're going to talk about a little bit, that there's the three aspects of what that is, and the three components in the lesser magistrate, which I'm not going to give you all today because that's going to be something that I bring out on Wednesday when I present that for the Lake County Liberty Coalition. But vocation is one of the primary aspects of the lesser magistrate, as it is for every created individual. Lesser magistrates are called to that calling to exercise what they do before God and for God. And then when it comes into what we're going to be talking about here is, what does it mean to exercise our vocation? Where does that come from? What does that mean when we look at now our education over the last 100 years, if not more, where a lot of this thinking on vocation slipped? And now what we have is pure indoctrination and taking and creating minions, especially right now. I continue to see the child abuse in the classroom. And the child abuse in the classroom is not anything to do with Kamala and O'Biden, them, or even Fauci. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do with the whole idea, especially with the teachers' unions and that, and taking and being, because you got to remember, teacher union, especially national, is communist. And so what they're doing is they're destroying our youth by making these little minions so that they're going to go around and they're going to go ahead and they're going to do whatever they are told. If they don't commit suicide or go crazy because they are now sitting far apart, they can't interact and touch and play, and they have to wear muzzles. And so many of them even have to be in these plastic plexiglass cubes. We have isolated our society to the extent that we are creating, hatching exactly what was in the Matrix. Think of that as we finish this last minute. Think of the movie The Matrix, and in those eggs that the humans were in, and the fact that they were just being fed all of this nonsense, and the reality that there they were in total isolation, being fed what their reality would be. That's not what God created. God did not create us to be isolated and in isolation. Sam Adams understood that. The Anti-Federalists understood that. Our republic, the idea of how our government is supposed to function, is tied back into we as beings before a living God. And when we have thrown that out the door, yeah, now you're in the cubes of isolation. So come on back in the next segment as we dig into this idea of vocation versus indoctrination. Sam Adams got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Yay! They got it right. And they were predictive of everything that's going on right now, whether you realize it or not. I always, as Tom Navolis, will take and recommend to you two things. One, go read the Anti-Federalist papers. They're even there at the resources at samueladamsreturns.net. And if you go there, you will find a link to the Anti-Federalist papers. And I've included them numerous times in the resources on a number of the different programs that are here in the archives at samueladamsreturns.net. Now, one of the key things that I would like you to do, as always, is take a look at the programming at Liberty Works Radio Network. Get in there. Go find those other hosts and hostesses with interesting topics, especially during the week. There's a lot on the weekend as well. But come on, join in on what's happening there for your liberty, and then find that donate button and help support everything that the network is doing. I really appreciate everything that all the folks at Liberty Works Radio Network have done in bringing me to their programming, and I'd ask you to support that the best that you can. So let's get back into this whole thing of, wait a minute, vocation, vocation, vocation. Where in the world did this idea of vocation come from? So I'm just going to tie things together here for you today in this, is to remember that all of your talents aren't on loan from God. They're actually given to you, created, embedded into you by God. And, quite frankly, it comes down to it. Kath and I have talked about this a number of different times, is that when you're not satisfied in something that you're doing, it's probably because there's a nudging there that you're not even aware of, that nudging is really the source of God's sourcing, because what you're doing necessarily does not align with how you're created, does not align with those talents that you have. And you're sitting there going, oh man, I hate my job. Well, yeah, you probably hate your job because you may be good at it. It may be that there's circumstances there that are causing it to be something that's difficult. But at the same time, what is a vocation? And we're going to talk about the exact definition of that vocation. But what I'd like to ask you is a question that is in an article here, and it's in the Banner of Truth on that website, and a New Testament professor rediscovery of the doctrine of vocation. Well, time out. Hang on. Rediscovery of the doctrine of vocation. Now, it's interesting that the doctrine of vocation was tied in at the time of the Reformation. Can we do a head slap here? I mean, really, that it was tied in, vocation was tied in at the time of the Reformation. That means that goes back a whole long time ago. And where has that doctrine been? I don't know. I don't believe it's well taught anywhere. I'm not just going to say in cemeteries. I mean seminaries, or colleges or any of that, because especially in the secular world, they don't want to teach you about that in its truest sense as a biblical doctrine. So when we look at that and consider that, you go and you look at Daniel, you look at even Adam, you look at those that help build the tabernacle. Well, they were craftsmen. Those were their talents that were given to them. But then, especially in the building of the tabernacle with Moses, you find in Scripture that they were given extra. The Holy Spirit came upon them and anointed them even more to accomplish that task. So here's the question out of this article that was back in 2018, August 27, 2018. So here's one for you. Is imagine the average layperson in your church, the owner of a bike shop, a truck driver, a doctor, a secretary, a lawyer, a school teacher. If you were to go and ask him or her, how does your pastor expect you to apply your Christian faith to your work? That's an interesting question. How does your pastor expect you to apply your Christian faith to your work? What would they say? I've sat in uh, Sunday schools and in Bible studies, and that question necessarily wasn't asked of the pastor, but asked of the person. How do you apply your Christianity in work? Well, I'm not allowed to. What do you mean you're not allowed to? I heard people say in a Sunday, well, they take and they're telling me and whoa, I can't do that. I can't have anything on my desk. I can't, talk. I can't say anything. Whoa, 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 time out. Not only when we look at all of the illegal ramifications of free speech being inhibited, um, that is even more so, what does that mean to apply it? Now, there's a lot of people that do apply it. There's a lot of people I know that, they just get this and understand that all that they do is unto the glory of God. And sometimes people are doing it because they're just strictly with the my hands are up, but they got the horse blinders on and they think that they are the ones that have to evangelize everything and everybody, and that has its own ramifications to it as well. But what does it mean in applying your belief in Christ and everything you put your hands and mind to for the glory of God? Oh, well, that's really interesting. That's a good question. That becomes the whole thing. Can you imagine pastors that here's an answer. Here's one that answers on that article. My pastor wants me to work diligently and honestly so I can make a lot of money and tithe. Oh, wow. That's okay. That's I yeah, I there's a lot of especially the megachurch pastors out there. That's here it is, especially those that teach the false message of the prosperity gospel. Go out there, you can make a lot of money. Yep, give me more. So this article has things to say about that. Here's another one. My pastor expects me to share the gospel with my coworkers. That's a biblical obligation that I have to have, and just what I kind of opened up with. And, so when you start looking at all of that, I think this is an extremely interesting article that goes in here and talks about all of these different potential answers. And then what does it really mean? What does it mean from that practical application of living your biblical truth? Um, yes, very, very interesting. How good are you at fixing things if you're a mechanic? How do you apply everything there? So, what is it? What is the doctrine uh, of vocation? So I'm going to read to you very short. It's in the newsletter. It's there also in the references there at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. But Simply put, R.C. Sproul says it this way. One of the key doctrines taught by Luther in the 16th century was the priesthood of all believers. That is, it's often misunderstood and misunderstood because it sounds as if Luther was saying that with the advent of Protestantism, the ordained clergy no longer is necessary. That's not true. Luther did not do away with an ordained clergy. He understood that there was a particular function established in the New Testament for what he would call full-time Christian ministry or pastoral ministry. What he was saying by the priesthood of all believers is that every believer is called to participate in the establishing and building of the kingdom of God. Okay? And every believer, whatever work he is engaged in, banker, lawyer, Indian chief, baker, whatever it may be, his work should be done to the glory of God. He should be subjecting his talents and gifts to live coram Deo, before the face of God, under the authority of God, and to the glory of God. This means that we should be wrestling with the biblical principles that teach us how to use our gifts and talents in a way that is serviceable to God and to humanity. In the medieval church, vocation was restricted to the clergy for the most part. But in the Reformation, it was said, no, the farmer has a vocation, the banker has a vocation, and so on. God calls all of us to different aspects of different parts in developing his kingdom. I mean, that's pretty broad. I mean, God's kingdom is pretty big, it's pretty broad. So I think R.C. Sproul, put it very simply, is that the simple definition is what you're called to, and in that calling is what we were saying in the first segment and a little bit in this one, is that what are you doing to the glory of God? What does it mean that when you're taking and you are that banker, that attorney, that lawmaker, that everything that you're doing is in that focus, within that whole concept of what does that mean to be before the living God, I think I love that, before the face of God, under the authority of God, and to the glory of God. Now, those were some things that we talked about last week where I mentioned about Governor DeWine placing his hand on 9 Bibles, New Testaments, and swearing his oath of office. Well, my goodness, everything that he's doing now uh, just uh, shows that he is not before the face of God. He's not under the authority of God. And he sure isn't doing things to glorify God because he's indenturing, enslaving, and the whole people of the state of Ohio, as well as others, are doing the whole nation. In fact, what he's doing, as we saw, that he's being a despot and a tyrant. In other words, he is acting as if he is God. So we have a lot of that going on out there. We have a lot of that is going on in the political realm. We have a lot of that is going on in education. We will briefly bring in, once again, Thomas Sowell. I just want to let you know on intellectuals and society. We've done a program on that, or I did a program on that last year, I believe, sometime. So you can look that up on Thomas Sowell. But there's some things that are really there because what we have is, instead of the elected listening to we, the people, as foundationally they should be, instead, what they're doing is they're listening to bureaucrats and the intelligentsia, and therefore they have put those people in the place of God and authority, and they are creating their own authority by virtue of taking and putting their trust in places that they shouldn't. Sam Adams clearly understood the perspective of God first, sitting under that authority of God and what it meant to look at being a legislator under that authority. Come on back in the third segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They did. They got it right. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and I do want to welcome back everybody there in Lima, Ohio at Soaring Eagle Radio, all my Screaming Eagle friends. Please go to soaringeagleradio.com and check everything out that's going on there. Dr. Mike is going to be doing some change-ups here. YouTube has canceled another one of his programs lately, and so therefore he is going to be making some transitions. So all you folks out there in Lima, Ohio, pay attention, and everybody else that listens to Dr. Mike on his Monday night programs, stand by, because he'll be letting you know where he is going and how that's going to be happening at his website. So we're talking about vocation instead of indoctrination, and I'm versus indoctrination. And you know what? I don't have all of the time that I want or ever will have to talk about the indoctrination. There's tons of people out there that have talked about the indoctrination. In the state of Ohio and across the nation, we know that there is the whole piece of social emotional learning that is being foisted on our kids, that is being instantiated in the schools. And this is now going to take, and every, as I said a number of times before, and will continue to say, is that now the mental health departments in every county, in every state, will just get a whole lot more money because there's nobody else out there that can take and show that your kid is a mental help, needs mental help, and that these mental health boards are the only ones that can give the mental health because your taxpayer dollars are going to go to none other than all the agencies that are godless agencies, and we're going to go with the new normal, and all the kids are going to be in the bubble, and we're going to be able to take and help bend them in their little plastic cocoons with their muzzles on and create them into the minions that they're going to be so that we can have an interesting society. All right, I'll quit being silly with it, but it infuriates me, and quite frankly, it's not all of the fault of the last two generations. It's not all of the fault of the pastors that are in the pulpits, because they got educated the same way that my dad did, his mom and dad did, and I did. Most everybody that's listening to the program or watching it on YouTube. So I guess when we look at, the doctrine of vocation being refound, wow, yeah, I would say that it is. And there's a professor out there. His name is Gene Edward uh, Veith, Veith. He actually is the one that helped find it. He wrote a book on this, and there's a lot of stuff that's been going on since 2017. 2017. Wow. So let's take a peek-see here back at the Reformation Bible College.org. And what is the Reformed doctrine of vocation? And this was something that went up in 2017. So we're even jumping back a little bit more. So here, let's pose a question again. Let's go with the question here, or the idea. Build this concept. Here's the picture. All right. Get the matrix tubes out of your head with the kids being muzzled and destroyed in a classroom. And let's take it a little bit more. So in today's society, work is too often considered that which must be endured purely in order to survive, right? I'm going to ad lib in here as I always do. However, this perspective is contrary to the message of Scripture, which clearly shows man's created duty as one of work for the glory of God. All right, here's where I'm cutting in. Think about it. When God created Adam and Eve, what did he do? He put them in the garden to tend the garden. We were there to work for and in the presence of God for the glory of God, to have a relationship with God while we're out there taking and working in the garden. Adam and Eve were to do that. So in labor, in the work, it was there for that glory of God. Now back to the article. Because of our sinful natures, there it is, the left hook. That was a jab. It wasn't the hook. For those on YouTube, you can see I was jabbing, not hooking. Anyway, because of our sinful nature, it is easy to join in the worker's lament instead of embracing our calling. Practically speaking, we often invest our time in thinking about vocation instead of appreciating our call to vocation. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. That goes to my opening statement in the first segment, that Rush Limbaugh, he wasn't off when he said that his talent, he was off on the fact that it wasn't loaned from God, it was given to him by God, and the same thing. But it is, what I said, you're off to work, you go, and you're thinking about something else. You're thinking about, boy, if I could only do this, man, I could really put my all into it, instead of doing what you're called to do, even if it is the right job and you're end up lamenting about what you're doing. So, we look at it and a lot of people say, oh, everything that we have here in America is that good old Protestant work ethic. And, that gives us that holistic view of labor. But here's another direct definition of vocation. It comes from the Latin vocare, means to call. Vocation is literally the calling which one enters into, and it has a real broad meaning. And interesting is that William Tyndale, a forerunner to the Reformation, I thought this was really cool in this article, sought to bring the Bible to common tongue. And during that time of Luther, the idea of specific callings or vocations was limited to the church, so on and so forth. But Tyndale actually was the one that created the English use of the word vocation. So it's a little tidbit in history. And then there's Dr. Stephen Nicholas in his book, What is Vocation?, references the ancient monastic motto of ora et labora. And that's the idea of what does it mean to the union of work and prayer. And how does that come together? Work and prayer? Wow, I guess in the monastery they did that. But what about the guy, as we said in the last couple segments, that you're the auto mechanic or you're that attorney or you're whatever you are? How does that fit together for you instead of just going, oh God, I can't, I got to help me figure out how I get through this problem? No, it's, oh Lord, how do I do this to glorify you in such a way that it represents you to others? Oh, that's a whole different way to look at it. Anyway, another little tidbit that I thought was interesting is that old Johann Sebastian Bach applied this doctrine in his music. And both for church and secular, Bach signed his work SDG. SDG. That's how he signed it, signifying Sola Deo Gloria. Wow. It's all done to the glory of God, regardless of whether it's in the church or not. So what's this all about, Tom? What does it mean? Well, when we get back to the article here that is in legionnaire.org, I thought it was very interesting that it was here, is that how vocation transforms society. I think this is the article that you need to dig into and where we're going to end with for today as it becomes that. So here, get it. You people that have listened to me over the number of years, or anybody that has, and I start bringing out the idea, what is the extensibility of the gospel? What does it mean that that gospel is in every aspect of who we are? What is it that that good news of Jesus is in every aspect of who we are and what we are and what we do? Well, this is what this, Dr. Gene Edward Veit takes and has this really cool article here on how vocation transforms society. And we hear about Christians out there and all the different stuff and all the different groups on transforming society. Well, you know what? We've done a pretty lousy job of transforming society. We in fact have let society transform Christians and Christianity. It's time we kind of turn that around. It's time that we looked at what that vocation means. It's time that we take and not just resist evil, but that we push back on evil. And we do it in our jobs. We do it in everything that we are supposed to be. I mean, okay, let's take a stretch here. Let's be the stretch and not an exercise stretch, but let's take the stretch and say, you know what? Rush Limbaugh pushed back on evil for 30 years. On evil. He pushed back on evil for 30 years, whether that was taking all the different hits, whether it was, as far as his political stance, everything that he was saying, his abilities to have that discernment and dissecting and being able to relay in very simple form for everybody to understand what was going on and how to then be able to potentially act if you had the leaning to act, which most people didn't, but maybe at least vote. Kathy and I were looking at that. Think about it. The statistical numbers of the reach of Rush Limbaugh was 44 million people on his program. 44 million people. Now, if you take and you look at the skewed fake numbers of Biden, he said that he got 80 million votes. Well, still 44 million, Rush Limbaugh had, more than half of his fake numbers. But then on the real voting for Donald Trump, there was 75 million people that voted about. So when you go 44 million and 75 million, whoa, that's a big number. Great amount of influence. So when we look at that influence, when we look at that, it's actively putting into effect that which you are created for, that which you're called for, and that, as this sentence says here, that the vocation is Luther's doctrine of the Christian life. More than that, vocation is the way God works through humans and human beings to govern his creation and to bestow his gifts. We're to do good things. We're to participate in society. We're to act according to that and carry out that prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, Our Father, and what? To take and do what the Father has going on in heaven on earth. Yeah, go look up the Lord's Prayer. It does do that. It's not just a limited exercise or a prayer. It is a prayer of action. So with that, we're down to the last moments. What do you do with all of this is that understand that you have a vocation. your talents, your gifting is from God, and that we need to bring that all into that honoring of Him, bring it into the understanding of Him and under His authority in such a way that we can affect society instead of having society affect us.